The sun was dying over Wyoming, bleeding crimson across the endless grassland. October wind swept through the sage, carrying the scent of coming winter and distant mountains wrapped in purple shadow. Thomas Hale stood on the porch of his weathered ranch house, watching the day surrender to darkness, same as he'd done every evening for the past 3 years since his parents died. At 35, Thomas had the lean, weathered look of a man who'd spent more time with cattle than people. His hands were scarred from barbed wire and rope burns, his face lined by sun and sorrow. The ranch sprawled around him, 2,000 acres of stubborn grass and harder dreams, inherited from a father who'd built it with blood and stubbornness, and a mother who'd softened its edges with curtains and garden flowers. Now the curtains hung gray with dust, and the garden had returned to wild prairie. He needed a cook, not a wife. Lord knew he'd given up on that notion after Sarah Mackenzie had run off with that smooth-talking banker from Cheyenne. Just someone who could make beans taste like something other than despair and keep coffee hot through the long winter ahead. The last cook, old Miguel, had headed south in September, claiming his bones couldn't take another Wyoming winter. Thomas couldn't blame him. The notice he'd posted at Morrison's General Store had been simple. Cook wanted, room, board, fair wages, inquire at the Broken Wheel Ranch, T. Hale. He'd ridden into town that morning to check for responses, expecting maybe a widow or an older woman looking for honest work. What he hadn't expected was Clara Mayfield. She'd been sitting in the dusty lobby of the Frontier Inn, a single carpetbag at her feet and a worn letter in her gloved hands. Even in the dim light filtering through grimy windows, she stood out like a dove among crows. Not beautiful in the painted way of saloon girls, but refined, with dark hair pulled back in a simple knot and clothes that spoke of Eastern sensibilities. A gray traveling dress that had seen better days but still held its shape. A cameo at her throat. Miss Mayfield, Thomas had approached, hat in hand, feeling suddenly conscious of the trail dust on his boots. She'd looked up with eyes the color of storm clouds, wary and measuring. "Mr. Hale, I presume?" Her voice carried the careful pronunciation of education, though he caught something else beneath it, a tremor of something held back. "Yes, ma'am. You answered about the cook position?" "I did." She folded the letter with precise movements, tucking it into her reticule. "I can cook, clean, mend. I've managed a household before?" Thomas studied her. She couldn't be more than 25. Too young to be a widow, too well dressed to be desperate. Yet here she was, 1,000 miles from anywhere that grew women like her. "The ranch is remote, 20 miles from town, and winter's coming on hard. It's not easy living." "I'm not looking for easy, Mr. Hale." Something flashed in those gray eyes. Defiance, maybe, or determination. "I'm looking for honest work, and a place where questions aren't asked about matters that don't concern the quality of my cooking." That should have been his first warning, but Thomas had lived long enough to know everyone carried secrets west of the Mississippi. Hell, he had his own. "Can you make biscuits? Light as clouds and twice as good with honey? Coffee? Strong enough to float a horseshoe, if that's your preference." Despite himself, Thomas almost smiled. "When can you start?" "Today, if you'll have me." They'd settled terms quickly, $30 a month plus room and board. Sundays off. No questions about her past if she didn't ask about his. She'd gathered her single bag and followed him to the wagon without looking back at whatever she was leaving behind. The ride from town had been 20 miles of awkward silence. Clara sat straight-backed on the wagon seat, hands folded in her lap, eyes fixed on the horizon. Thomas tried once or twice to make conversation, pointing out landmarks, mentioning the ranch boundaries, but she responded with mere nods or single words. The October wind grew colder as they climbed into the foothills, and he noticed her thin shawl did little against it. "There's a buffalo robe under the seat," he offered. "I'm fine, thank you." But he saw her shiver and pulled the robe out anyway, draping it over her lap without comment. She stiffened at first, then slowly relaxed, pulling it up to her chin. "Thank you," she said again, softer this time. The sun was low when they crested the final ridge. Below them, The Broken Wheel Ranch spread out in the valley. The main house, barn, bunkhouse for the few hands he employed, various sheds and corrals. In the dying light, it looked almost peaceful. But Thomas knew better. He saw what she must see, isolation sharp as a blade, silence deep enough to drown in. It's very... Clara searched for a word. Remote. That bother you? She was quiet so long he thought she wouldn't answer. Then, no, remote is what I need. They descended into the valley as the first stars emerged. A wolf howled somewhere in the darkness, answered by another, then another, until the night filled with their wild chorus. Clara pulled the buffalo robe tighter but didn't comment. Thomas respected that. A woman who didn't spook at wolf song might last longer than old Miguel. The house was cold and dark when they arrived. Thomas lit lanterns while Clara stood in the doorway, taking in what would be her new world. He tried to see it through her eyes. The heavy furniture his mother had cherished now dulled with neglect. The kitchen that hadn't seen a woman's touch in 3 years. The stone fireplace that gaped like a cold mouth. "Your room's upstairs, first door on the right," he said, setting her bag at the foot of the stairs. "Kitchen's through there. Pump's working, but the water runs cold. Wood box needs filling. I'll get a fire going." She removed her gloves, finger by finger, studying the kitchen doorway. "When did you last eat a proper meal, Mr. Hale?" The question caught him off guard. "Can't rightly say." "Then I'll start tonight. Show me the pantry." He'd expected her to be tired from travel, to want to settle in first. Instead, she hung her shawl on a peg and rolled up her sleeves, revealing pale forearms that had never seen field work. Within an hour, she had the kitchen warm and something that smelled like heaven simmering on the stove. Thomas sat at the scarred wooden table, watching her work. She moved with economical grace, finding things by instinct. The good knives his mother had hidden in the back drawer, the cast iron pan that needed just a bit of bacon grease to sing. When she set a plate before him, beef and potatoes and carrots and rich gravy, biscuits that steamed when broken open, he had to close his eyes at the first bite. "It's good," he managed, then felt foolish for the understatement. She poured coffee, strong and black, then surprised him by pouring a cup for herself and sitting across from him. "Tell me about the ranch, Mr. Hale, the practical things. How many hands? What supplies we have? What you expect?" So he told her, grateful for the business-like conversation. 4 hands who ate breakfast and supper at the house, a root cellar half full, smokehouse with some beef and pork, plenty of flour and beans and coffee, winter coming on hard. He could smell it in the wind, see it in the way the cattle bunched together. "And what about you?" she asked when he'd finished. "What are your habits? When do you rise? What do you prefer to eat? Are there things you particularly dislike?" "Up before dawn. Usually, coffee first thing. I'm not particular about food. Been making do with whatever's quick." He paused, studying her face in the lamplight. "What about you, Miss Mayfield? Anything I should know?" Her expression closed like a door swinging shut. "I cook. I clean. I keep to myself. That's all you need to know." The sharpness of it stung, but Thomas recognized the sound of someone guarding their wounds. "Fair enough." She rose, gathering the dishes. "I'll need a few things from town. Spices, some fabric for curtains, lamp oil. I can make a list. I'll head in next week." "Thank you." She paused at the kitchen door, lamplight catching the silver threads of old grief in her eyes. "And Mr. Hale, I'm grateful for the work. I mean to earn my keep." After she'd gone upstairs, Thomas sat alone in the kitchen that already felt different with her presence. Through the window, stars scattered across the Wyoming sky like spilled salt. He thought about the way she'd pulled that buffalo robe around herself, the way she'd asked no questions about his own emptiness, the way she'd made his kitchen warm again. He didn't know what had driven Clara Mayfield to his door, what shadows chased her west. But as he banked the fire and headed to his own cold bed, he found himself hoping she'd stay through winter. The ranch needed more than a cook. It needed life again, even if it came wearing sorrow like a second skin. Outside, The wolves sang their ancient song to the rising moon, and the wind whispered secrets through the grass. In her room above, he heard floorboards creak as she moved about, settling into this new exile. Soon that sound, too, faded into silence, and the Broken Wheel Ranch wrapped itself in darkness, waiting for whatever morning would bring. The first week taught Clara the true meaning of harsh. She woke before dawn to find frost painting the windows and her breath visible in the cold room. The water in her wash basin had skimmed over with ice. She dressed quickly, layers of petticoats and her warmest dress, then made her way downstairs to wage war against the cold kitchen. The stove was a temperamental beast that required coaxing and exact amounts of kindling. Too much, and it smoked. Too little, and it died. She learned its moods through trial and burned fingers, rising earlier each day to have coffee ready when Thomas and his men stumbled in from their first rounds. The ranch hands were a weathered lot. Jake, an old cowboy with more wrinkles than words. Sam and Pete, brothers who'd drifted up from Texas, and Miguel's nephew Carlos, who'd stayed on despite his uncle's departure. They treated her with careful respect, touching their hat brims and muttering ma'am into their coffee cups. But she caught their curious glances. A woman like her didn't belong in a place like this, their eyes said, though their mouths stayed politely shut. The well was the first battle she lost. Located 50 yards from the house, it required hauling water in buckets that grew heavier with each trip. The pump handle was rusted and stubborn, fighting her every pull. By the third day, her hands were raw with blisters despite her gloves. She said nothing, wrapping them in torn petticoat strips and continuing her work. Thomas noticed anyway. She was scrubbing dishes that evening when he appeared with a tin of salve. "For your hands," he said, setting it on the table. "They're fine." "No, they're not." His voice was matter-of-fact, not unkind. "City hands weren't made for ranch work. Use the salve, or they'll crack and bleed come real winter." She wanted to refuse, to maintain the careful distance between them. But practicality won. "Thank you." He lingered in the doorway, seeming to wrestle with words. "Carlos can help with the water hauling. No shame in it. I'll manage my duties. Mr. Hale. Stubborn as a mule." He muttered, but she caught what might have been approval in it. The wind was another enemy. It came down from the mountains like a living thing, finding every crack in the walls, every loose board. It carried dust that settled on everything. Dishes she just washed. Floors she just swept. Bread dough rising under cloth. She learned to work around it, to accept that clean was a relative term on a Wyoming ranch. But the dust storms were something else entirely. The first one caught her hanging laundry. The sky went from blue to brown in minutes, a wall of dirt advancing across the prairie like God's own fury. She barely got the clothes inside before it hit, the house shuddering under the assault. For 3 hours, dirt sifted through invisible cracks, coating everything. When it passed, she found Thomas and the men looked like ghosts, covered head to toe in dust. "Welcome to Wyoming," Jake said, grinning through the dirt on his face. That night, after the men had gone, she sat at the kitchen table and cried. Not dramatic sobs, just quiet tears of exhaustion and frustration. She'd left behind cruelty and scandal, yes, but also servants and ease. A world where dust stayed outside and water came from taps. Here, every simple task was a battle against the land itself. She was wiping her eyes when she heard it, a sound from the main room. Thomas stood by the cold fireplace, fiddle in his hands, playing a melody slow and mournful as the wind outside. He didn't look up when she appeared in the doorway, just continued playing, the notes hanging in the air like questions without answers. When he finished, the silence felt different, not empty but full of unspoken understanding. He set the fiddle aside and built up the fire without commenting on her red eyes. She made tea without asking if he wanted any. They sat in the 2 chairs before the fire, the light dancing across their faces. "My mother played," he said eventually. "Taught me when I was young. Haven't touched it much since she died. It's beautiful. Sad, but beautiful. Most beautiful things are." She thought of her own mother's piano. sold to pay debts after father's business failed, of the music room in Richard's house, where she'd never be welcome again. Yes, she agreed. They are. That became their pattern. Days of hard work and careful distance. Evenings when sometimes, not always, they'd find themselves by the fire. He'd play occasionally, old mountain tunes and hymns half-remembered. She'd mend clothes or read from one of the few books on the shelf. They talked little, but the silence grew comfortable. The cattle were another education. Longhorns mostly, tough as the land that fed them, with a few Herefords Thomas was trying to breed in. She watched from the kitchen window as he and the men worked them, checking for disease, doctoring wounds, moving them to different pastures. The animals were thin, ribs showing through dusty hides. Drought last summer. Thomas explained one evening. Grass didn't come in like it should. Lost 20 head already, and winter hasn't even started. She heard the weight in his voice. Understood now why he ate every meal like it might be his last. Why the men's faces grew grim when they looked at the sky. The ranch balanced on a knife's edge between survival and ruin. She began to economize without being asked, stretching the meat with more vegetables, making stock from bones she would have thrown away back east, finding ways to make beans and cornmeal into different dishes so the sameness didn't wear on the men. They noticed. She could tell, eating with more enthusiasm, sometimes even complimenting the food in their gruff way. "This is right fine, ma'am," Sam said one night over her potato soup. "Fills a man up proper." It was the night Clara first sang. She hadn't meant to. She was alone, or thought she was, kneading bread for the next day. The house was quiet. The men all in the bunkhouse. Thomas supposedly checking the horses. The melody came unbidden. An old lullaby her mother used to sing. Her voice, unused for months, was rough at first, then found its way. "Sleep, my child, and peace attend thee," all through the night. The Welsh words came easier than English, carrying memory and loss in every note. She sang softly, letting the rhythm match her kneading, finding comfort in the ancient song. When she finished, she realized the kitchen had grown darker, and she needed to light the lamps. Thomas stood in the doorway. She froze, hands still in the dough, face flushing hot. How long had he been there? His expression was unreadable in the dimness, but something in his stillness made her heart race. "I'm sorry," she began. "I didn't realize." "Don't apologize." His voice was rougher than usual. It was beautiful. "What language was that?" "Welsh, my grandmother's songs." She turned back to the bread, needing something to do with her hands. "I shouldn't have—" "Sing whenever you want, Miss Mayfield. This house has been quiet too long." He left before she could respond, but she heard his boots pause on the stairs, as if he wanted to say more. The moment stretched, then broke as he continued up. That night, trying to sleep in her cold room, Clara pressed her face into the pillow and tried not to think about the look on his face when he'd heard her singing, like a man dying of thirst who'd just glimpsed water. It scared her, that look. She'd come here to hide, to work, to forget, not to wake something in a lonely rancher's eyes. But the next night, washing dishes alone, she found herself humming, just humming, nothing more. And if she heard boots pause outside the kitchen door, if she sensed him listening in the hallway, she pretended not to notice. Some thirsts, she reasoned, could be eased without drowning. The days grew shorter, the nights colder. She learned the ranch's rhythms, when to expect the men for meals, which days Thomas rode to the far pastures, how to read weather in the way the cattle bunched. She learned that Jake's gruffness hid a sweet tooth, that the brothers argued constantly but would die for each other, that Carlos sent half his wages to his mother in Santa Fe, and she learned about Thomas, not through words, he remained careful with those, but through observations, how he gave the best portions to his men, how he worked longer hours than anyone, shoulders bent under responsibility, how he touched his parents' photograph on the mantel each morning, like a blessing or a penance. She was patching his coat one evening when she found the letter in the pocket, not meaning to pry, but it fell out, already half unfolded. Her eyes caught the words before she could look away. Understand your anger, Tom, but what's done is done. Sarah is my wife now. She folded it quickly, tucked it back, but the damage was done. Sarah, a woman's name, carried like a wound. She understood now the careful distance he kept, the way he sometimes looked through her as if seeing someone else. That night, she sang a different song, an older one, about loss and continuing on. She sang it quietly, just for herself and perhaps for the man she knew listened from somewhere in the darkness of the old house. A gift of understanding, offered without words. Winter was coming. She could feel it in her bones now. The way the old-timers predicted weather. The preparation consumed them all, bringing the cattle closer, checking feed supplies, patching every hole in the buildings. She worked alongside them when she could, learning to value warmth over propriety. The last evening of October, the temperature plummeted. She served supper to men who ate quickly, eager for their warm bunks. Thomas remained after they left, staring into his coffee as if it held answers. "Snow by morning," he said, "maybe a lot of it." "We're ready," she assured him, though she wasn't sure she believed it. He looked at her then, really looked at her, and she saw past his careful control to the worry beneath. "This place breaks people, Miss Mayfield. Good people, strong people. It takes everything and gives back grudgingly." He paused. "I should have told you that before you came. Would it have changed anything?" He considered that. "No, I don't suppose it would have. You were running from something, same as we all are out here." It was the closest they'd come to acknowledging her past. She chose her words carefully. "Sometimes what we run from is worse than what we run to, and sometimes it follows anyway." The truth of that sat between them, heavy as the coming snow. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows. Winter had arrived at the Broken Wheel Ranch, and with it, the test of whether a woman who sang Welsh lullabies and a man who carried old wounds could survive it together. Clara stood, gathering the dishes. As she passed his chair, she let her hand rest briefly on his shoulder, the first time she'd touched him deliberately. "We'll manage, Mr. Hale. We're both too stubborn to do otherwise." She felt him tense, then slowly relax under her touch. "Thomas," he said quietly. "Call me Thomas." "Thomas," she repeated, then withdrew her hand and returned to her kitchen, her heart beating strangely in her chest. That night, as the first snow began to fall, she sang again. Not a lullaby this time, but a song of hope, of spring returning after winter's death. And if she heard the fiddle join her softly from the main room, playing a harmony to her melody, she sang all the sweeter for it. The Broken Wheel Ranch settled under its blanket of snow. Two lonely souls within its walls, learning that some distances were meant to be crossed, one careful step at a time. November brought more than snow. It brought visitors to the Broken Wheel, and with them, the outside world Clara had tried so hard to leave behind. The first sign of trouble came with the supply wagon from town. Thomas had ordered winter provisions, and Clara watched from the kitchen window as he helped unload sacks of flour and coffee. But there was someone else with the driver, Mrs. Morrison from the general store, a woman whose tongue was sharper than any Wyoming wind. "Thought I'd come see how your new cook is settling in, Mrs." Morrison announced, climbing down from the wagon with surprising agility for her 60 years. Her eyes were already scanning the ranch, no doubt cataloging every detail for later gossip. Clara smoothed her apron and stepped onto the porch. "Mrs. Morrison, how kind of you to visit." The older woman's gaze raked over her, taking in the simple dress, the work-roughened hands, the absence of wedding ring. "Miss Mayfield, isn't it? From back east?" "Yes, ma'am." That single sound contained volumes of speculation. Unusual for a young woman to take such a position, living out here with unmarried men. Thomas stepped forward. "Miss Mayfield's quarters are separate, and her conduct is above reproach." I'm sure. But Mrs. Morrison's tone suggested otherwise. "Still, People do talk. A woman alone, so far from home. One wonders what would drive her to such isolation. Clara felt the familiar tightness in her chest, the sensation of walls closing in. But this wasn't Philadelphia, where whispers in drawing rooms could destroy her. This was Wyoming, where she had work and purpose. I find honest work preferable to idle gossip. Mrs. Morrison. Perhaps you'd like some coffee before your long ride back. The woman's eyes narrowed at the subtle rebuke, but she accepted. In Clara's clean kitchen, she asked probing questions disguised as concern. Where was Clara's family? Had she no relatives to object to such rough living? Surely she didn't intend to spend winter so far from civilized company. Clara answered with careful truths. Her parents were deceased. She had no family requiring her presence. She was content with her position. Each answer seemed to frustrate Mrs. Morrison more. Well, the woman finally said, setting down her cup with unnecessary force, I suppose we all make our choices, though some choices invite more scrutiny than others. After she left, Clara stood at the window watching the wagon disappear into the distance. Thomas appeared beside her, his presence solid and reassuring. She's a gossiping old crow, he said. No one pays her much mind. Everyone pays gossips mind. It's why they exist. He was quiet for a moment. Is there anything I should know? Anything that might come back to cause you trouble? She thought of Richard Thornton's face, twisted with rage when she'd refused him, of the bruises hidden beneath her sleeves, of the lies he'd spread when she'd fled rather than marry him. Nothing that affects my work here. That's not what I asked. She turned to face him, seeing concern rather than suspicion in his eyes. There was a man, a marriage arranged by my late father's business partner. I refused. He didn't accept that refusal gracefully. So I left. Did he hurt you? The directness of the question surprised her. Not in ways that show. Thomas's jaw tightened. If he comes here, he won't. I'm beneath his notice now. Ruined women don't merit pursuit. She tried to keep the bitterness from her voice and failed. You're not ruined. His voice was fierce. You're the hardest working, most decent woman I've known. Anyone who says otherwise will answer to me. The vehemence of his defense made her eyes sting. She turned back to the window to hide it. Thank you, Thomas. But Mrs. Morrison's visit was just the beginning. The next week brought Josiah Brandt. Clara was in the garden, digging up the last of the potatoes before the ground froze solid, when she heard horses approaching. Multiple horses. Riding hard. She straightened, shading her eyes against the pale sun. 4 men crested the ridge, Brandt in the lead. Even at a distance, she could see the arrogance in how he sat his horse, the expensive cut of his coat. He owned the Double B Ranch 10 miles north, and according to the hand's careful gossip, he wanted to own much more. Thomas emerged from the barn, rifle casual in his hands. Brandt, you're off your range. Now, Tom. Brandt's voice carried the false friendliness of a snake. Just being neighborly. Heard you got yourself a new cook. Thought I'd come pay my respects. His pale eyes found Clara, and she fought the urge to shrink under his gaze. She'd known men like him back east, men who viewed everything as property to be acquired. Miss Mayfield. Brandt touched his hat brim, but the gesture held mockery rather than respect. Word in town is you're quite the mystery, a refined lady choosing ranch work. How interesting. Nothing mysterious about honest employment, Mr. Brandt. Indeed, though one wonders what drove such a lovely woman to seek employment so far from civilization. Family troubles, perhaps, or affairs of the heart. Thomas stepped forward. State your business or move on. Brandt. My business? Brandt smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Why, I'm always interested in changes that affect the valley. New people, new arrangements. Speaking of which, Tom, my offer still stands. The Double B could absorb this place easy. Give you a fair price, enough to start fresh somewhere else. Answer's still no. Winter's coming on hard. Lost cattle, broken fences, depleted supplies. A man alone can't hold a spread like this. His gaze slid to Clara again. Even with help. Clara understood then. This wasn't about her at all, but about pressuring Thomas to sell. She was just another angle of attack. "We'll manage," Thomas said flatly. "Will you?" Brant leaned forward in his saddle. "See, I've been thinking. A woman shows up out of nowhere, no references, no family. Man has to wonder what she's running from, and what kind of trouble she might bring with her. Careful, Brant." "Oh, I'm always careful." "Tom, careful enough to send some inquiries back east. Amazing what you can learn with the right questions in the right places." Clara's blood ran cold, but she kept her face still. Beside her, she felt Thomas tense like a wolf before a fight. "You've got 10 seconds to get off my land," Thomas said quietly. Brant laughed. "No need for hostility, just being thorough. After all, we have to protect our community from undesirable elements. But don't worry, Miss Mayfield. I'm sure whatever secrets you're hiding are perfectly innocent." He wheeled his horse around, his men following. At the ridge, he turned back. "Think about my offer. Tom, winter's long and cold. Be a shame if something happened to that cattle herd, or to anyone else on the ranch." After they were gone, Clara found herself shaking. Not from fear, she'd faced worse than Josiah Brant, but from anger. She'd traveled so far, given up everything, and still the past reached for her with grasping fingers. "Clara." Thomas's voice was gentle. She realized he'd never used her given name before. "Whatever he finds, whatever he threatens, you're under my protection. You understand? You can't fight the whole world for me. Watch me." That night, the temperature dropped 20 degrees. Clara served supper to somber men who'd heard about Brant's visit. Jake muttered darkly about range wars and night riders. The brothers checked their weapons with grim efficiency. Even Carlos, usually cheerful, looked worried. "He's done it before," Sam said quietly. "The Hendersons, 2 years back. Accidents kept happening. Fences cut, water fouled, cattle scattered. They sold out by spring. We're not the Hendersons," Thomas said firmly. "We'll post watches, ride in pairs. Anyone sees anything suspicious, they report it immediate." But Clara could see the strain in his face. The ranch was already struggling. They couldn't afford to lose cattle or have equipment destroyed. And Brant had barely started his campaign. That night, unable to sleep, she crept downstairs. Thomas sat by the dying fire, ledgers spread before him. Even from the doorway, she could see the grim figures. Too much red ink. Not enough black. "Couldn't sleep either?" he asked without looking up. She moved to sit across from him. "How bad is it?" "Bad enough. Lost more cattle than I thought to disease. Feed costs are up. If we lose any more stock," he rubbed his face. "Brant knows exactly when to push." "This is my fault. If I hadn't come here—" "Don't." He looked at her then, firelight catching the gold flecks in his brown eyes. "Brant's been circling for years. You're just his latest excuse, but I've made it worse. Given him ammunition. Maybe. Or maybe you've given us something to fight for." The words hung between them, weighted with meaning neither was ready to acknowledge. Clara looked at the ledgers, at the numbers that told a story of slow defeat. "My grandmother left me some money," she said quietly. "Not much, but—" "No. Thomas, no." He reached across to cover her hand with his. "You don't buy your way into safety. Clara, that's not how this works." His hand was warm, calloused, completely encompassing hers. She should pull away, maintain the careful boundaries. Instead, she turned her palm up, lacing their fingers together. "Then how does it work?" "We stand together, we fight together, we survive together." The fire popped, sending sparks up the chimney. Outside, wind howled around the corners of the house. But here, in this moment, there was warmth and connection, and something that felt dangerously like hope. "I'm not used to together," she admitted. "Neither am I. Maybe it's time we'd learned." She squeezed his hand, then slowly withdrew. Too much, too fast, with too many shadows crowding in. But something had shifted between them, some wall beginning to crumble. Standing to leave, she paused at the doorway. "Thomas." Whatever Brant finds out about my past, whatever he tries to use against us, I want you to hear it from me first. When I'm ready." "When you're ready," he agreed. Not before. She climbed the stairs to her cold room, but her hand still tingled from his touch. Below, she heard him moving about, checking locks, banking the fire, standing guard, as he did every night, against whatever threatened his land and the people under his protection, including her, for the first time since fleeing Philadelphia. Clara allowed herself to think the word that had been building in her heart. Home, despite the gossips and threats, despite Brant's malice and Winter's approach. The broken wheel was beginning to feel like home. That night, as snow began to fall again, she sang, not a lullaby this time, but a warrior's song her grandmother had taught her. A song about standing ground, about finding strength in unlikely places, about hearts that refused to break despite all attempts to shatter them. And if she heard footsteps pause outside her door, if she sensed Thomas listening in the hallway, she sang louder. Let him hear, let him understand. Whatever came next, they would face it as he'd said. Together. December arrived with a vengeance. The storm struck 3 days before Christmas, a white fury that turned the world into a howling void. Clara woke to find snow drifted halfway up her window, the house groaning under the wind's assault. She dressed in darkness, fingers numb with cold, and made her way downstairs. The kitchen was an icebox. The stove had died in the night, and frost glazed every surface. She set to work reviving it, blowing on frozen fingers between tasks. Thomas appeared as the first flames caught. His face was grim. Ice in his beard. Lost visual on the herd. Need to get them into the near pasture before they drift. In this storm, no choice. Cattle bunch up in blizzards. Try to stay warm. If they drift into Dead Man's Gulch, he didn't finish. Didn't need to. Clara heated coffee while he roused the hands. They stumbled in, wrapped in every layer they owned. Faces already raw from the brief walk from the bunkhouse. She served them quickly. Coffee, biscuits, dried beef, fuel for what lay ahead. Stay together, Thomas instructed. Rope between horses. If you can't see the man next to you, stop moving. We sweep the North Range first. Push everything south. They filed out into the white darkness. Clara pressed her face to the window but could see nothing beyond swirling snow. The wind screamed like something alive and hungry. Hours passed. She kept coffee hot, soup simmering, water boiling for when, if they returned. The house felt hollow without their presence. Just her and the storm and the terrible waiting. Noon came and went. No sign of them. She paced, unable to settle to any task. The wind seemed to carry voices, cries for help that might be real or imagined. Every sound made her heart race. By 3 o'clock, she couldn't stand it. She wrapped herself in Thomas's mother's old buffalo coat, tied a rope around her waist, and secured the other end to the porch rail. Just to the barn, she told herself, just to see if the horses had returned. She made it 20 feet before the world disappeared. White above, white below, white in every direction. The wind struck like fists, driving snow into her face until she couldn't breathe. She turned back, following the rope hand over hand, and barely found the porch. Inside, shaking. She understood how easily the land could kill, how quickly a person could vanish into that white maw. And Thomas was out there, had been out there for hours. 4 o'clock, still nothing. She lit every lamp, putting them in windows as beacons. The soup had cooked down. She added water, kept it ready. Her grandmother's voice came unbidden. When you can do nothing else, sing. Songs carry farther than prayers. So she sang, standing at the kitchen window. She raised her voice against the storm. Welsh hymns, Appalachian ballads, anything that might carry through the white darkness. Her throat grew raw, but she didn't stop. If they were lost, if they were trying to find their way back, maybe they would hear, maybe it would guide them home. Full darkness fell. Then, through the wind's howl, she heard it, the barn door slamming. She flew outside, lantern in hand. Shapes materialized from the white. Horses, men, Thomas in the lead. They stumbled into the kitchen like the walking dead. Ice sheathed them, turning clothes to armor, beards to white masks. Jake collapsed into a chair, hands too frozen to hold the coffee cup she pressed on him. Sam and Pete huddled by the stove, shaking uncontrollably. Carlos was missing. "Where?" she began. "Coming," Thomas managed through chattering teeth. "Broke off to help a calf. He'll make it." She worked frantically, pulling off frozen boots, wrapping hands around hot cups, forcing soup into them spoonful by spoonful. Thomas's fingers were white with frostbite. She held them between her palms, trying to force warmth back into them. "The cattle?" she asked. "Most of them. Lost maybe 10 in the gulch before we found them." His voice was hoarse. "Would have lost more, but—" He looked at her strangely. "We heard singing. Through the storm. Followed it back." The kitchen door burst open. Carlos stumbled in, carrying something wrapped in his coat, a calf, barely alive. He laid it by the stove, and Clara grabbed feed sacks to rub circulation back into its legs. "Damn fool thing to do," Jake muttered, but his tone held admiration. They spent the next hour thawing out, man and beast alike. Clara kept the coffee coming, the soup hot. Slowly, life returned to frozen limbs. The calf even managed to stand, wobbling on stick legs. When the hands finally trudged back to the bunkhouse, Thomas remained. He sat by the stove, staring at his bandaged hands. Clara had treated the frostbite as best she could, but he'd lose fingernails at least. "You saved us," he said quietly. "That singing, we were turned around, couldn't find the buildings. Then Jake heard it, said it was like a lighthouse in the dark. I had to do something." "You always do something. Never seen a woman work like you do, fight like you do." He looked up at her. "Why? Clara, what drives you so hard?" She sank into the chair across from him. Perhaps it was the storm, the brush with death, the strange intimacy of survival. Perhaps she was simply tired of carrying secrets. "My father was a good man but a poor businessman. When he died, we discovered debts, so many debts. His partner, Richard Thornton, offered a solution. Marriage to him would clear everything, save my mother from poverty. But you refused. Not at first. I thought it was duty, but Richard—" She pulled her shawl tighter. "He showed his true nature gradually, controlling, cruel. When I finally said no, he was furious. Said I'd let him on, ruined his reputation. He spread rumors that I was loose, unstable, a fortune hunter who'd tried to trap him." Her voice dropped. "The night I left, he came to the house, said if I wouldn't be his wife, I'd be something else. I ran, took what money I could find and ran." Thomas's damaged hands clenched. "If he ever shows his face here, he won't. I'm nothing to him now. Just a story to tell at his club, about the desperate woman who threw herself at him. The old shame burned, but less than before." "Mrs. Morrison was right to wonder about me. I am ruined, by society standards. Society can go to hell." The vehemence in his voice made her look up. His eyes held a fury she'd never seen before, but it wasn't directed at her. "You survived," he continued. "You got away, found work, made a place for yourself. That's not ruin, that's courage." "Is it? Sometimes I think I'm still running, still letting him control my life." "No." Thomas leaned forward. "You're living, working, singing in storms to guide lost men home. That's not running. That's standing your ground in a different place." The wind had died to a whisper. In the sudden quiet, they could hear the house settling, the stove crackling, the calf's soft breathing. Clara felt something ease in her chest, some knot she'd carried for months. "Your turn," she said softly. "Sarah." He flinched but didn't look away. "My best friend since childhood, Ben Walker. We were building neighboring ranches, planning to share water rights, help each other through the lean years. Sarah Mackenzie came out from St. Louis to teach school. Prettiest thing I'd ever seen. I courted her proper, thought we had an understanding. But she chose Ben. Chose his smoother words, maybe, his bigger dreams. They married quick, quiet, found out later they'd been meeting while I was out with the herds. His laugh was bitter. Best part? They expected me to understand, to forgive, to stand up with them at the wedding like nothing had happened. Did you? No. Told them both to go to hell, bought Ben's share of the water rights, and haven't spoken to them since. They moved to Cheyenne last year. He's in banking now. He stared at the fire. Betrayal always cuts deepest from those we trust most. Clara reached across the space between them, taking his bandaged hand carefully. We're a pair, aren't we? Walking wounded, hiding out here at the edge of the world? Maybe that's what it takes. Maybe you need to be a little broken to survive a place like this. She thought about that as the storm picked up again, rattling the windows. Perhaps he was right. Perhaps the land recognized its own. Those who'd been scoured by loss, weathered by pain, and still stood standing. I should check the animals, Thomas said, but made no move to rise. I should start bread for tomorrow. Clara agreed, equally still. They sat holding hands, watching the fire, while outside the blizzard raged. The touch was comfort and promise and something more. Recognition between two souls who'd learned the hard way that some storms you weathered alone, but others required the warmth of another human heart. Finally, reluctantly, they parted. Thomas headed to the barn, Clara to her kitchen duties. But something fundamental had shifted. The careful distance they'd maintained was gone, replaced by something stronger, understanding born of shared pain and mutual survival. That night, the storm reached its peak. The house shook under the assault. Clara lay in her bed, listening to the world tear itself apart outside. Then, through the chaos, she heard it. Thomas's fiddle, playing slow and steady from his room down the hall, an answer to her storm song, a declaration that they were still here, still alive, still fighting. She rose, wrapped in quilts, and made her way to his door. It stood slightly open, lamplight spilling into the hallway. She knocked softly. Come in. He sat on the edge of his bed, fiddle in his injured hands. Playing must have hurt, but he didn't stop. She settled into the chair by his window, pulling the quilts tight. Couldn't sleep? He asked between songs. The storm's too loud. Thought I'd listen to something prettier. He played another tune, this one lighter. She hummed along, their music weaving together in the lamp-lit room. No words were needed. This was conversation enough, two people refusing to face the storm alone. Toward dawn, the wind finally began to ease. Clara had dozed in the chair, waking to find Thomas adding wood to his small stove. Gray light filtered through the frosted window. Storm's breaking, he said. She rose, quilts falling away. They stood at the window together, watching the world remake itself in white. Drifts reached the roof in places. Trees bent double under snow's weight. But the sky was clearing, stars fading into dawn. We survived, she said. We did. She turned to go, propriety reasserting itself with the daylight. But at the door, she paused. Thomas, that song you played, the last one, what was it? Something my mother used to sing, about finding home in unexpected places. It's beautiful. So was your singing. In the storm. He met her eyes. Don't know that we'd have made it back without it. You'd have found a way. You always do. Maybe, but I'm glad I didn't have to try alone. The words held weight beyond the storm, beyond the night's intimacy. Clara nodded, understanding, and slipped back to her room. There would be consequences for this closeness, gossip to face, boundaries to navigate. But for now, they'd survived the blizzard. Together, as she dressed for the day's work, she heard the men stirring, voices calling as they dug out from the storm. There would be damage to assess, animals to tend, paths to clear. But they were alive, all of them, and the ranch still stood. She descended to her kitchen, lit the stove, started coffee, normal things, routine things, but somehow different now. The storm had scraped away pretense, leaving something raw and true in its wake. When Thomas appeared for breakfast, their eyes met across the kitchen. A smile passed between them. Small, private, full of unspoken promises. Then the hands tumbled in, full of stories about the storm, and the day's work began. But Clara knew, and she sensed Thomas knew too, that something had fundamentally changed in the white darkness of the blizzard. They were no longer two separate people sharing a space. They were partners, in all the ways that mattered. The realization should have frightened her. Instead, as she served breakfast to men who'd risked their lives for the ranch, as she watched Thomas organize the day's repairs despite his injured hands, as she felt the solid presence of community around her, Clara felt something she hadn't experienced in years: peace. The storm had passed. They'd survived. And in surviving, they'd found something worth fighting for, not just the ranch, but each other. Whatever came next, whatever challenges Brant or Winter or the world threw at them, they'd face it as they'd faced the blizzard, standing together against the storm. The peace after the storm lasted exactly 3 days. On the 4th morning, as Clara was feeding the chickens in the pale dawn light, she heard riders approaching, many riders, moving fast. She dropped the feed bucket and ran for the house. Thomas was already on the porch, rifle in hand, Jake and the brothers flanking him. But it wasn't Brant's men who crested the ridge. It was Sheriff Watson from town, badge glinting in the morning sun, and with him a posse of 8 men. "Tom," the sheriff called, reining in his horse. He was a decent man, Clara knew, fair-minded if sometimes overwhelmed by the job. "Need to talk to you, and Miss Mayfield." Clara's stomach clenched. She stepped onto the porch, keeping her hands visible and steady. Thomas moved slightly, positioning himself between her and the riders. "What's this about, Jim?" Thomas asked. The sheriff dismounted, looking uncomfortable. "Got a wire yesterday. From Philadelphia. Man named Richard Thornton claims Miss Mayfield stole from him. Substantial sum. He's pressing charges. Wants her arrested and returned for trial." The words hit Clara like physical blows, but she kept her chin up. She'd known this might come, had been waiting for it in the dark hours of too many nights. "That's a lie," she said clearly. "I took nothing that wasn't mine." "Maybe so, ma'am, but I've got a warrant, legal and proper. Need you to come with us." Thomas stepped forward. "Now hold on. No, Tom." Watson's voice held warning. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be. I've got a job to do." Clara saw Thomas's knuckles whiten on the rifle. Jake and the brothers were coiled tight, ready to fight. For her. These men who'd known her only months were ready to face down the law for her. The realization nearly broke her composure. "I'll come," she said quietly. "Let me get my coat." "Clara, no." Thomas turned to her, eyes blazing. "We'll get a lawyer. Fight this. With what money? And while I sit in jail waiting?" She touched his arm gently. "I won't have bloodshed over lies. I'll go." She went inside, hands shaking as she pinned on her hat. Through the window, she could see Thomas arguing with the sheriff, gesturing angrily. But Watson stood firm, and his men looked nervous, hands near their weapons. When she emerged, Thomas caught her arm. "This isn't over," he said fiercely. "I'll follow right behind. Get you out on bail." "No," she pulled free gently. "The ranch needs you. The men need you. Don't abandon everything for me. Clara, promise me." She met his eyes, trying to pour everything she felt into that look. "Promise you'll take care of things here. Don't let Brant win because you're chasing after me." His jaw worked, but finally he nodded. "I promise. But this isn't over." The sheriff helped her mount one of the spare horses. As they prepared to leave, Jake stepped forward. "Miss Clara, that song you was singing, about warriors, sing it in that jail. Let 'em know what kind of woman they're dealing with." The gruff kindness nearly undid her. She managed a nod, then followed the sheriff down the path she'd traveled months ago, leaving the broken wheel behind. The ride to town was a blur. Watson tried to be kind, assuring her the jail had a separate cell for women, that he'd telegraph for a judge right away. But Clara barely heard him. Her mind was racing, trying to think how Richard had managed this. What supposed theft could he claim? Then she remembered. Her mother's jewelry, sold to fund her escape. Richard had given it to her mother, called it early wedding gifts. But there had been no wedding, so by his twisted logic. The jail was everything she'd feared. Cold stone, barred windows, the smell of despair and unwashed bodies. Watson's promised separate cell was a corner partitioned by hanging blankets. She sat on the narrow cot, listening to the drunk in the next cell retch and moan. Hours passed. Through the small window, she watched the sun arc across the sky. No one came. No food, no water, no word of what would happen next. The other prisoners called out crude suggestions until Watson threatened them into silence. Near sunset, she heard commotion outside, raised voices, Thomas's among them. Her heart leaped, but she forced herself to stay seated. Whatever he was trying, she couldn't let him make things worse. Watson appeared at her cell. "Got a visitor, 5 minutes." It wasn't Thomas. Mrs. Morrison stood outside the bars, triumph poorly hidden behind a mask of concern. "My dear, what a terrible situation." "Of course, I'm not surprised. When a woman of questionable reputation takes up with rough men." "Did you come to gloat, Mrs. Morrison? Or did you have a purpose?" The woman's eyes hardened. "I came to offer advice. Confess. Throw yourself on the court's mercy. Perhaps they'll be lenient. Given your obvious difficulties, I have nothing to confess. Pride goeth before a fall. Miss Mayfield, or should I say, Miss Thornton. Yes, I've been corresponding with Mr. Richard Thornton, such a respectable gentleman, heartbroken over your betrayal." She leaned closer. "He's coming, taking the train. Should be here within the week to see justice done." Clara's blood turned to ice. Richard, here. The thought of facing him again, of being dragged back to Philadelphia in chains. Mrs. Morrison smiled at her expression. "Perhaps now you'll consider your options. A full confession might spare you the worst of it." After she left, Clara sat in the gathering darkness, fighting despair. Richard was coming. He'd stand in court, handsome and respectable, spinning his lies. Who would believe her? A woman who'd fled in the night, taken work beneath her station, lived among rough men. She'd be painted as desperate, unstable, criminal. She was still sitting in darkness when Watson returned. "Got another visitor, and before you ask, I couldn't keep him out if I tried." Thomas entered, and Clara flew to the bars. He caught her hands through them, his warmth chasing away some of the cold that had settled in her bones. "Are you hurt? Have they fed you?" "I'm fine. Thomas, you shouldn't be here." "The hell I shouldn't." He glared at Watson. "She needs a lawyer, Jim, and decent food, and blankets that don't have fleas. I'm doing what I can. Tom, Judge will be here day after tomorrow." "Not good enough." Watson sighed. "It's all I got. Now say your piece. You've got 3 minutes." When he left, Thomas pressed closer to the bars. "Listen to me. Carlos rode to Laramie to find a lawyer. Jake and the boys are watching the ranch. I'm staying in town until this is sorted." "Thomas, no, the ranch." "Will survive a few days without me. You're what matters now." Mrs. Morrison was here. She said, "Richard's coming. On the train." Her voice broke on his name. Thomas's expression turned dangerous. "Let him come. You don't understand. He's convincing, charming. He'll make everyone believe. I don't give a damn what he makes people believe. I know the truth. That's enough." "Is it? In a court of law, with him in his fine suit and me in a jail cell?" Thomas was quiet for a moment. Then, "Tell me exactly what he's claiming you stole." "My mother's jewelry. I think he gave her pieces over the years. Called them gifts. But after I refused him, he probably decided they were conditional gifts. Loans against a marriage that didn't happen." She laughed bitterly. "He's clever. It's just plausible enough." Do you have any proof they were gifts? My mother's dead. It's my word against his. Then we'll find another way. His hands tightened on hers. Clara, look at me. I've fought drought, disease, blizzards, and men who wanted to take everything I'd built. I'll be damned if I let some eastern bastard take you away. Watson returned too soon. As Thomas reluctantly released her hands, he leaned close. That song Jake mentioned, sing it tonight. Sing it loud. You're not alone in this. Then he was gone, leaving Clara in the dark with only the memory of his warmth. She returned to her cot, pulled the thin blanket around her shoulders, and thought about warriors and battles and the different kinds of courage required for each. Near midnight, when the jail had quieted except for snores and muttered dreams, she began to sing. Softly at first, then stronger. The Welsh words echoed off stone walls, telling of women who'd defended their homes with scythes and cunning, who'd faced down armies with nothing but determination. "Shut up!" someone yelled, but others hushed him. She sang of mountains that stood firm against storms, of rivers that carved canyons through patient persistence. She sang until her throat was raw, until even the guards stopped to listen. When she finally fell silent, a voice from the darkness said, "That was right, pretty, Miss, right, pretty." She slept fitfully, waking often to pace the small cell. Dawn brought Watson with coffee and bread, looking haggard. "Town's in an uproar," he said. "Half of them want you released, half want you hanged. Tom Hale's been working the decent folks, telling your side. He shouldn't. Woman, that man would fight the devil himself for you. Maybe you should let him." The next day crawled past. Through her window, she caught glimpses of the drama outside. Thomas arguing with the mayor, Jake and the ranch hands riding in, taking positions around the jail like guards. Mrs. Morrison holding court with the gossips, no doubt painting Clara in the darkest colors. That evening, Watson brought news. Thornton's arrived, staying at the hotel. Judge comes tomorrow. Clara's hands trembled, but she kept her voice steady. "Thank you for telling me. Miss Mayfield, Clara." Watson struggled with words. "I've been sheriff here 8 years. Seen a lot of folks come through. I know the difference between criminals and people running from bad situations. For what it's worth, I believe you." It was worth more than he knew. Clara managed to thank him before he retreated, clearly embarrassed by his admission. That night, she didn't sing. She sat at the window, watching the stars wheel overhead, and prepared herself for battle, not with weapons or fists, but with truth against lies, courage against intimidation. Somewhere out there, Richard was sleeping in a soft bed, confident in his victory. Somewhere, Thomas was standing guard, determined to protect her. And somewhere between them, Clara found her own strength, not in running this time, but in standing her ground. Tomorrow would bring the judge, the trial, the confrontation she'd fled months ago. But she was different now. The Wyoming wind had scoured away her softness. The ranch work had built strength in more than her hands. And the love, yes, love, she could finally name it, of a good man had reminded her she was worth fighting for. When dawn came, painting the sky crimson, Clara was ready. She washed as best she could, pinned her hair carefully, and straightened her wrinkled dress. When Watson came to escort her to the courthouse, she walked with her head high. The street was packed. It seemed everyone in 50 miles had come to watch. She saw friendly faces, Jake tipping his hat, Carlos nodding encouragement, and hostile ones, Mrs. Morrison's gossip circle, Brant smirking from the hotel porch, and Thomas, standing at the courthouse steps, dressed in his best suit, looking like he'd fight an army to reach her. Their eyes met across the crowd, and Clara drew strength from the fierce protectiveness in his gaze. Then the courthouse doors opened, and she walked inside to face her past, knowing that whatever happened, she would not face it alone. The Broken Wheel Ranch had given her more than work and shelter. It had given her a home worth fighting for, people worth protecting, and a love worth risking everything to keep. The battle for her freedom was about to begin. The courtroom smelled of wood polish and sweat, packed beyond capacity with curious townspeople. Judge Harrison, a stern man with silver whiskers, had to bang his gavel 3 times before the crowd settled. Clara sat at the defendant's table. The lawyer Carlos had found a young man named Samuel Garrett, nervously shuffling papers beside her. Across the aisle sat Richard Thornton, immaculate in a charcoal suit, his dark hair perfectly oiled. He hadn't looked at her once, playing the part of the wounded party to perfection. His lawyer, brought from Philadelphia, had the smooth confidence of a man used to winning. "This is a preliminary hearing," Judge Harrison announced, "to determine if sufficient evidence exists to extradite Miss Mayfield to Pennsylvania for trial. Mr. Pemberton, present your case." Richard's lawyer stood, adjusting his gold watch chain. "Your Honor, the facts are simple. Miss Clara Mayfield was engaged to my client, Mr. Richard Thornton. During their courtship, Mr. Thornton gifted Miss Mayfield's mother several pieces of valuable jewelry, with the understanding these were advances against the marriage settlement. When Miss Mayfield broke the engagement and fled in the night, she took these jewels, valued at over $2,000, with her." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. $2,000 was a fortune. "Do you have proof of this theft?" the judge asked. "We have receipts for the jewelry purchases, Your Honor, and affidavits from Philadelphia Society members who saw Miss Mayfield wearing said pieces. We also have testimony regarding her unstable mental state and desperate financial situation after her father's death." Clara forced herself to remain still as Pemberton painted her as a calculating fortune hunter who'd ensnared Richard, then robbed him when better prospects failed to materialize. Each word was carefully chosen to destroy her character. When young Garrett stood to cross-examine, his voice shook. "Mr. Thornton, were these gifts to Miss Mayfield or her mother?" "To her mother, as I stated, in anticipation of becoming family." Richard's voice was perfectly modulated. Reasonable. Only Clara could hear the satisfaction beneath it. "And did you ever tell Mrs. Mayfield these gifts were conditional?" "A gentleman doesn't attach conditions to gifts. I trusted in Miss Mayfield's honor." He managed to sound both noble and betrayed. Garrett floundered through a few more questions before sitting down, clearly outmatched. Clara's heart sank. This was exactly what she'd feared. Richard's word against hers, with all the weight of wealth and respectability on his side. "Miss Mayfield," the judge said, "do you wish to make a statement?" Clara stood, aware of every eye in the room. "Your Honor, my mother's jewelry was not stolen. It was given freely, over years, with no conditions attached. When she died, it became mine. I sold it to fund my travel here, to start a new life after Mr. Thornton." She paused, choosing words carefully. "After he made it clear I had no future in Philadelphia." "Because you broke our engagement," Richard interrupted, his mask slipping. "Led me on for months, then humiliated me." "Mr. Thornton," the judge warned. But the damage was done. Richard had shown, just for a moment, the temper Clara knew too well. She pressed on. "I broke no engagement. Your Honor, I refused his proposal. That's not a crime." "Perhaps not," Pemberton interjected smoothly. "But theft certainly is. Your Honor, we request immediate extradition." The courtroom doors burst open. Thomas strode in, followed by a small, neat woman in traveling clothes. The crowd parted before them, whispers rising. "Your Honor," Thomas said, "I have evidence relevant to this case." Judge Harrison frowned. "This is highly irregular. Mr. Hale. So is a man using the law to hunt down a woman who rejected him." "Thomas," Clara whispered, but he was already at the bench. The woman beside him. "This is Mrs. Eleanor Hartley, Your Honor, from Philadelphia. She has information about Mr. Thornton's character and his claims." Pemberton jumped up. "Objection!" "This witness hasn't been properly introduced." "This isn't a formal trial, Counselor," the judge said dryly. "I'll hear what she has to say." "Mrs. Hartley?" The woman stepped forward, small but composed. "Your Honor, was Engaged to Mr. Thornton until last month, when I discovered his previous attachment to Miss Mayfield and the lengths he went to pursue her. The courtroom erupted. Richard's face went white, then red. Eleanor, what are you doing here? Following my conscience. Richard. She turned back to the judge. I found letters in Richard's study, dozens of them, written but never sent, to Miss Mayfield. They paint a very different picture than the one presented here. Letters full of obsession, threats, promises to ruin her if she didn't return. Those were private, Richard started. Yes, they were. Private evidence of harassment. Mrs. Hartley opened her reticule, producing a bundle of papers. I also found receipts showing the jewelry was purchased over 3 years, long before any engagement was discussed. Gifts to curry favor with Miss Mayfield's mother, not conditional loans. Clara stared at this unexpected savior. Mrs. Hartley met her eyes with surprising sympathy. I know what it is to be the focus of Richard's attention when thwarted. Miss Mayfield, I wouldn't wish it on anyone. This is ridiculous, Pemberton blustered. Stolen letters, a jealous woman's revenge. I didn't steal them. Mrs. Hartley said calmly. They were in the desk of the home we were to share. I had every right to examine them. What I found horrified me enough to break our engagement and follow Richard here, to prevent an injustice. Judge Harrison examined the letters, his expression growing grimmer with each page. The courtroom held its breath. Mr. Thornton, the judge finally said, these letters suggest a pattern of harassment that puts your claims in a very different light. Do you deny writing them? Richard's composure cracked. She led me on, made promises. I made no promises, Clara said firmly. I was polite to my father's business partner. When he pressed for more, I refused. That's all. These receipts, the judge continued, clearly show purchases made years before any engagement. Gifts, not loans. Combined with these disturbing letters, I find insufficient evidence to support extradition. Your Honor, Pemberton protested. Moreover, Harrison continued, steel in his voice, Mr. Thornton, I strongly suggest you return to Philadelphia immediately. If Miss Mayfield wishes to press charges for harassment, she'll find a sympathetic ear in this court. The gavel came down with finality. Case dismissed. The courtroom exploded into chaos. Richard lunged toward Clara, face twisted with rage. But Thomas was there, catching him by the collar and shoving him back. Touch her and I'll kill you, Thomas said quietly, and everyone who heard him believed it. Sheriff Watson and his deputies quickly escorted Richard and his lawyer out, the crowd parting with mixed expressions, some disappointed at missing more drama, others nodding approval at justice done. Clara found herself surrounded by well-wishers. Jake pumped her hand like a well handle. Carlos whooped. Even some townspeople who'd shunned her offered congratulations. But she only had eyes for Thomas, standing guard as always. Mrs. Hartley approached, looking tired but resolved. I'm sorry for what Richard put you through. Miss Mayfield, he hides his nature well, until crossed. Why did you come? Risk so much? Because I nearly married him. Another month and I would have been trapped. She shuddered delicately. When I found those letters, saw what he'd done to you, I couldn't let him do it again. No woman deserves that. Clara impulsively hugged her. Thank you. I don't know how to repay. Live well. Be happy. That's revenge enough on men like Richard. Mrs. Hartley smiled sadly. I'll be returning to Philadelphia on the afternoon train. There's much to sort out there, but I'm glad I came. As the crowd dispersed, Clara found herself alone with Thomas and young Garrett, who was packing his papers with shaking hands. You did well, she told the lawyer. Thank you for trying. I did nothing. Mr. Hale's the one who saved you. Tracked down Mrs. Hartley, convinced her to come, paid for her travel. Clara turned to Thomas, who looked uncomfortable with the praise. How did you even know about her? Telegrammed to a friend in Philadelphia. Asked him to dig into Thornton's life. Found out about the engagement. Thought she might have information. He shrugged. Got lucky. Lucky. Clara shook her head. You spent money we don't have. Risked the ranch. I risk nothing that matters. His voice was fierce. Not compared to losing you. Garrett excused himself hastily, leaving them alone in the empty courtroom. Sunlight slanted through tall windows, catching dust motes like scattered gold. Thomas? No. Let me say this. He took her hands. Work roughened against work roughened. I've been a fool. Clara, holding back, afraid of being hurt again. But when they took you, when I thought I might lose you to that bastard's lies, I realized I'd rather risk everything than live without you. Clara's eyes filled. I'm not an easy woman to love. I have nightmares. I jump at shadows. I may never fully trust. I'm not an easy man to love either. Set in my ways. Married to the land, still carrying ghosts. His thumbs traced circles on her palms. But maybe that's why we fit. We know what it costs to trust again. The town will gossip. Say I'm using you, that you're thinking with everything but your brain. Let them talk. He pulled her closer. I've faced down blizzards and drought and men who wanted me dead. I'm not afraid of wagging tongues, she laughed, tears spilling over. I love you, Thomas Hale. I should have said it that night in the storm. Say it now. Say it tomorrow. Say it every day until we're old and gray. I love you, she repeated, and he kissed her there in the courthouse, with sunlight and dust motes bearing witness, when they finally broke apart, both breathless. He rested his forehead against hers. Come home, Clara. The ranch needs you. I need you. Yes, she said simply. Yes to all of it. They walked out together into the noon sun. The street had cleared, most folks returning to their business, but a small group waited by the horses. Jake in the hands, Mrs. Hartley preparing for her journey, even Sheriff Watson looking pleased. About time, Jake muttered, but he was grinning. As they prepared to leave, Josiah Brandt emerged from the hotel, Richard beside him. Both men wore expressions of thwarted fury. This isn't over, Hale, Brandt called. You can't protect her forever. Thomas helped Clara mount her horse, then swung onto his own. I don't have to protect her forever. Brandt, just long enough for her to learn to protect herself. He smiled coldly. Though I reckon she's already got the hang of it. Clara straightened in her saddle, meeting Brandt's glare steadily. Mr. Brandt, Mr. Thornton, you're both men who believe power gives you the right to take what you want, but you're wrong. Some things can't be taken. They can only be freely given. She turned her horse toward home, not waiting to see their reactions. Thomas and the hands fell in around her, a protective guard she no longer needed but deeply appreciated. As they rode out of town, Clara began to sing, not the warrior song this time, but something lighter, a song of homecoming, of spring after winter, one by one. The men joined in, their rough voices harmonizing with hers. The Broken Wheel Ranch waited in the distance, no longer a refuge but a home. There would be challenges ahead. Brandt wouldn't give up easily, and scars took time to heal. But for now, Clara allowed herself to feel the joy of it, freedom, justice, and love, all one in a single morning. So, Thomas said, riding close beside her, about that judge mentioning marriage settlements. Clara laughed, free and clear as mountain water. Are you proposing Mr. Hale? Might be, if I did it proper, not in a courtroom with half the county watching. I might say yes, if you asked proper. Tonight then, by the fire, with the fiddle playing. I'll wear my best dress, the one that isn't covered in jail dust. They smiled at each other, two souls who'd found their way through darkness to this moment of light. Behind them, the town faded into memory. Ahead, the mountains rose eternal, and between them, the ranch spread out like a promise of work and struggle. Yes, but also of belonging. Clara was going home. Not running this time, not hiding, but riding straight and true toward the life she'd chosen and the man she loved. The past had been faced and defeated. The future stretched ahead, bright with possibility. And somewhere in the vast Wyoming sky, She could swear she heard her grandmother's voice on the wind, singing the old songs of women who'd fought for their freedom and won. The weeks following the trial brought an unexpected peace to the Broken Wheel Ranch. Word had spread through the valley about Clara's vindication and Thomas's fierce defense of her. Some folks warmed to her, offering nods of recognition in town. Others remained cold, but their whispers held less venom now. Even Mrs. Morrison seemed subdued, though Clara suspected she was merely regrouping for future gossip. Thomas had been true to his word about proposing properly. That first night back, he'd played his mother's favorite waltz on the fiddle while Clara prepared supper. Then, as she'd turned from the stove, she'd found him on one knee in the kitchen, holding out a simple gold band. "It was my mother's," he'd said. Dad gave it to her when they proved up their first claim. Nothing fancy, but it lasted through everything life threw at them. Clara had said yes before he could finish, dropping to her knees to kiss him among the flour bins and potato sacks. It wasn't the grand proposal she might have dreamed of in her Philadelphia days, but it was perfect for who they'd become. Now, 3 weeks later, she stood in her small room, putting on her best dress, blue wool that brought out her eyes, carefully mended where it had torn during ranch work. Sarah Henley, the blacksmith's wife who'd become an unexpected ally, was pinning up Clara's hair. "Never thought I'd see Tom Hale married," Sarah said around a mouthful of hairpins. "That man's been alone so long. Some of us figured he'd forgotten how to be otherwise." "He hasn't forgotten," Clara said softly. "He just needed time to trust again." "Don't we all?" Sarah stepped back to admire her work. "There. You look beautiful. Tom's going to swallow his tongue when he sees you." Through the window, Clara could see the ranch transformed. Jake and the hands had strung lanterns between the house and barn. Tables made from sawhorses and planks held the potluck offerings of neighbors who'd come to witness the wedding. Not everyone in the valley, but enough. Enough to show that Clara Mayfield was no longer an outsider. A knock at the door made her heart jump. "Come in." But it wasn't Thomas. Sam and Pete entered, looking uncomfortable in their clean shirts and slicked-back hair. "Miss Clara," Sam started, then cleared his throat. "Me and Pete, we wanted to say something before things get all official. You gave us a chance when others wouldn't." Pete continued. "We got records, you know. Did time for rustling down in Texas when we were young and stupid. Tom hired us anyway, but we always felt like we had to prove ourselves. Then you came," Sam picked up. "Treated us decent from the start. Never looked at us like we were less than. That means something." Pete pulled out a small, wrapped package. "We made this together. It ain't much, but—" Clara unwrapped it carefully. Inside was a wooden spoon, the handle intricately carved with flowers and vines. The work was beautiful, delicate, clearly a labor of love. "It's perfect," she said, tears threatening. "I'll treasure it always." The brothers shuffled their feet, embarrassed by emotion. "Well, we better get— just wanted you to know. You got family here, not just Tom." After they left, Clara sat holding the spoon, marveling at how much had changed. She'd arrived seeking solitude and found community, sought work and discovered love, run from one life and built another, stronger and truer than what she'd left behind. Another knock. This time it was Carlos, grinning wide. "It's time, Senora. The preacher's here, and Don Thomas is wearing a hole in the ground with his pacing." Clara rose, smoothing her skirts. No father to walk her down the stairs, no bridesmaids or flower girls. But as she descended, she saw Jake waiting at the bottom, dressed in what might have been his Civil War uniform, brass buttons gleaming. "Figured you might need an arm to lean on," he said gruffly. "If that's acceptable." "More than acceptable." She took his offered arm, feeling the tremor in it. This rough old cowboy was nervous for her sake. They walked out into the March afternoon, unseasonably warm, the Chinook winds having chased winter back into the mountains. The assembled crowd turned to watch. Ranchers and their wives, townspeople who'd made the journey, all the hands from neighboring spreads. Not a society wedding, but something better. real. And there was Thomas, standing with a circuit preacher under an arch Jake had built from pine branches. He wore his good suit, the one from the trial, but this time his face held joy instead of fear. When he saw her, his expression softened into something that made her knees weak. "Who gives this woman?" the preacher asked when they reached the makeshift altar. "I reckon she gives herself," Jake answered. "But we all stand witness that it's a good match." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Clara took Thomas's hands, feeling their familiar calluses, seeing her future in his eyes. The ceremony was simple, traditional vows. Nothing fancy, but when Thomas said, "I do," his voice carried across the ranch with the same certainty he used to call cattle home. And when Clara echoed him, she felt the last chains of her old life fall away. "I now pronounce you man and wife," the preacher intoned. "You may kiss your bride." Thomas drew her close, one hand cupping her face with infinite tenderness. "Hello, Mrs. Hale," he whispered. "Hello, Mr. Hale," she whispered back. Their kiss was brief, mindful of the audience. But it held promises of longer kisses to come, of nights by the fire and mornings waking together. The crowd erupted in cheers, and suddenly Clara was being hugged by people she barely knew, everyone wanting to wish them well. The celebration that followed was unlike any wedding reception Clara had attended in Philadelphia. No orchestras or champagne fountains. Instead, fiddles and guitars appeared. Someone rolled out a barrel of beer, and the dancing began on the packed earth between house and barn. Clara found herself passed from partner to partner, Jake demonstrating a surprising grace, the ranch hands taking turns with exaggerated formality, even Sheriff Watson claiming a dance. But always her eyes found Thomas, and his found her, a constant connection across the crowd. As the sun set, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold, she noticed two riders approaching. Her stomach clenched. Even on her wedding day, trouble could find them. But as they drew closer, she saw it was the banker from town, Mr. Aldrich, and his wife. "Congratulations, Mrs. Hale," Aldrich said, dismounting. "I apologize for arriving late, but I wanted to deliver this personally." He handed Thomas an envelope. "The note on your ranch, paid in full." Thomas frowned. "That's not possible. I haven't—" "A benefactor insisted on clearing the debt, said to tell you it was a wedding gift from someone who values what you've built here." Clara caught Thomas's arm as he swayed. The ranch debt had been a constant weight, growing heavier with each lost cow and broken fence. To have it suddenly gone. "Who?" Thomas managed. Aldrich smiled. "I'm sworn to secrecy. But they said you'd understand when I mentioned that second chances shouldn't be wasted on looking backward." "Eleanor Hartley." It had to be. Clara's throat tightened with emotion. The woman who'd saved her from false charges had now saved their ranch from foreclosure. "Tell them—" Thomas started, then stopped. Overcome. "Tell them we're grateful. More than words can say." As Aldrich and his wife joined the celebration, Clara and Thomas stood apart for a moment, absorbing this new freedom. No debt hanging over them, no immediate threat of losing everything, just the normal challenges of ranch life, which suddenly seemed manageable. "We're going to make it," Thomas said wonderingly. "We are," Clara agreed, then with a mischievous smile. "But first, you owe me a dance. Husband—" He swept her into his arms as the fiddles struck up a waltz. Around them, their community celebrated, rough men and work-worn women who understood that happiness was earned, not given. Above them, stars emerged one by one, and the mountains stood eternal guard. "No regrets?" Thomas asked as they swayed together. "None. You. Only that I didn't find you sooner. You found me exactly when we both needed it." Clara said, "When we were ready." As if summoned by their joy, other couples joined the dancing. Sarah Henley with her husband, the banker and his wife. Even Jake awkwardly steering Mrs. Morrison around the makeshift dance floor. The Broken Wheel Ranch had become, for this night at least, the center of something larger, a community celebrating resilience and new beginnings. Later, much later, after the guests had gone and the hands had stumbled off to the bunkhouse, Clara and Thomas sat on the porch steps, watching the moon rise over the grasslands. Her wedding dress was dusty from dancing, his jacket abandoned somewhere in the house. But they were married, truly married, and the future stretched before them full of possibility. "Sing for me," Thomas requested. "That Welsh lullaby, the one from your first night here." Clara leaned against his shoulder and sang, her voice carrying across the quiet ranch. But this time, the song held no sorrow, no longing for what was lost. Instead, it spoke of gratitude, of home found and love discovered. When she finished, they sat in comfortable silence, watching clouds drift across the moon. Then Thomas stirred. "Clara, that name doesn't suit you anymore." She pulled back to look at him. "What do you mean?" "Clara was the woman who ran, who hid, who survived alone. But you're not her anymore. You're stronger, braver. You need a name that fits who you've become." "And what name would that be?" He considered. "I've been thinking of you as Grace, because that's what you brought to this place. Grace and music and life." Clara, no, Grace, felt tears slip down her cheeks. To be renamed by love, to be seen so clearly and cherished so deeply. "Grace Hale," she tested. "Yes, that's who I am now." They rose together, hand in hand, and walked into their house. Their home. Tomorrow would bring work, cattle to tend, meals to cook, fences to mend. Brant would surely cause more trouble, and the ranch would face other challenges. But tonight, Grace Hale sang in her kitchen while her husband played fiddle by the fire. Tonight, the Broken Wheel Ranch sheltered not just two lonely souls, but a family, found, chosen, and bound by something stronger than law or blood. Tonight, the past was truly past, and the future was theirs to build. As Grace blew out the last lantern and followed Thomas upstairs, she heard the wind pick up outside, carrying the scent of spring grass and possibility. Somewhere in that wind, she imagined her grandmother's voice joining hers in song, a blessing on this new life, this new name, this love that had transformed a cook into a wife and a lonely rancher into a husband. The Broken Wheel Ranch settled into sleep, complete at last. And in the morning, when the sun painted the mountains gold and the cattle called for tending, Grace and Thomas Hale would rise together to meet whatever came next. Partners, always. Spring came to Wyoming like a blessing that year, painting the grasslands green and filling the streams with the snowmelt. The Broken Wheel Ranch thrived under Grace and Thomas's partnership. Without the crushing debt, they could invest in better breeding stock and repair long-neglected equipment. The hands worked with renewed vigor, knowing their jobs were secure. Grace had fully grown into her new name and role. She still cooked and kept house, but also rode out with Thomas to check the herds, learning to read the land's moods and the cattle's needs. Her hands, once soft, were now strong and capable. Her songs still filled the evening air, but now Thomas's fiddle always joined her, creating harmonies that spoke of contentment and shared purpose. Even Josiah Brant seemed to have retreated, his attempts at harassment dwindling after Clara's trial and the ranch's mysterious benefactor. Some whispered he'd found other targets for his ambitions. Others said he was simply biding his time. Grace didn't care, as long as he stayed away from their land and their people. It was a morning in late May when everything crystallized into perfect clarity. Grace stood on the porch, watching the sun rise over the mountains, a cup of coffee warming her hands. The ranch spread before her, cattle grazing peacefully, the garden she'd planted beginning to show green shoots, smoke rising from the bunkhouse where Jake was undoubtedly complaining about his creaking bones. Thomas emerged from the barn, pausing to look up at her. Even at this distance, she could see his smile, the way his whole face changed when he saw her. He raised his hand in greeting, and she waved back, feeling that familiar warmth bloom in her chest. "You coming to help with the branding?" he called. "After I get bread rising," she called back. Someone has to keep you cowboys fed." His laughter carried across the yard, rich and full. Grace realized she'd never heard him laugh when she first arrived. Now it came easily, frequently, a sound as natural as wind through grass. As she turned to go inside, movement on the ridge caught her eye. A lone rider, moving fast. Her heart clenched. Even months of peace hadn't erased the instinct to fear unexpected visitors. But as the rider drew closer, she recognized Carlos, returning from his supply run to town. He reined in hard at the porch, his usual cheerful face serious. "Senora Grace, you need to see this." He handed her a letter, addressed in elegant script. Grace's hands trembled slightly as she opened it. The return address was Philadelphia, but the handwriting wasn't Richard's. "My dear Clara," it began, and she recognized Eleanor Hartley's hand. "I hope this finds you well and happy in your new life. I write with news I thought you should hear. Richard Thornton is dead." Grace sank onto the porch step, continuing to read. Richard had challenged another man to a duel over some perceived slight, his temper finally leading to his end. He died instantly, leaving behind debts and scandals that would have ruined any wife he'd managed to trap. "You are truly free now," Eleanor wrote. "Whatever shadows he cast over your future have died with him. I thought you should know, so you can finally put that chapter completely behind you. Live well, dear Clara, or should I say Grace? Yes, I heard about your marriage and your new name. How fitting. Live well, Grace Hale, and never look back." Thomas appeared at her side, having seen her distress. She wordlessly handed him the letter, watching his face as he read. "How do you feel?" he asked when he finished. Grace considered. "Free. Sad for the waste of his life. Grateful I escaped." She looked up at her husband. "But mostly, I feel finished with it all. That life, that person I was, it's like reading about a stranger." Thomas pulled her close, and she breathed in the familiar scent of leather and hay and home. "Good. Then let's live the life we've built, not the one you left." That evening, they held their own private ceremony. Grace burned Eleanor's letter in the fireplace, watching the last tangible connection to her old life turn to ash. Then she and Thomas walked out to the hill behind the house, where his parents were buried. "Ma, Pa," Thomas said simply. "This is Grace, my wife. I think you'd have loved her. She's brought music back to the ranch and laughter and hope. We're going to be all right." Grace knelt and placed wildflowers on both graves. "Thank you," she whispered, "for raising a son who knows how to love through fear, who fights for what matters, who builds rather than tears down. I promise to take care of him and the legacy you left." They stood together as the sun set, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. Below them, the ranch settled into evening routines. Jake's harmonica joined the twilight chorus of birds and insects. The cattle lowed softly as they bedded down. Smoke rose from the chimney of the house that was now truly home. "No more looking back," Grace said. "Only forward." Thomas agreed. They walked down the hill hand in hand, toward the warm lights of home. Behind them, the mountains stood eternal guard. Above them, the first stars appeared in the vast Wyoming sky. And between them, love had built something stronger than either could have imagined when a lonely rancher posted a notice for a cook, and a desperate woman answered the call. The Broken Wheel Ranch had become whole, sheltering not just bodies, but hearts that had learned to trust again. In finding each other, Grace and Thomas had found themselves, not perfect, not without scars, but perfect for each other. As they reached the house, Grace paused on the porch, looking back at the land that had tested and shaped them. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. Calving season, summer droughts, the endless work of ranch life. But it would also bring Thomas's smile over morning coffee, songs by the evening fire, and the deep satisfaction of building something lasting together. "Coming inside?" Thomas asked from the doorway. "In a moment," Grace said. "I want to remember this, all of it, how it feels to be exactly where I belong." He came to stand beside her. understanding without words. Together they watched the night settle over their land, their home, their life. Then Grace began to sing, not a Welsh lullaby or a warrior's song, but something new, a song of gratitude and joy, of love found and homes built, of two broken people who'd discovered they were stronger together than apart. Thomas's fiddle joined her from inside the house, the melody carrying across the ranch and beyond. Into the vast Wyoming night, it was a declaration and a promise, a testament to the power of second chances and the courage to trust again. The lonely rancher had wanted a cook. The desperate woman had needed a job. But in the end, they'd both found so much more: a partner, a home, and a love that would weather whatever storms came next. The Broken Wheel Ranch stood strong against the darkness, a beacon of hope in the wilderness. And inside, Grace and Thomas Hale continued their duet, their music telling the story of how two lost souls had found their way home to each other. Thank you for listening to this Wild West love story. Where are you enjoying this tale from? Please comment below and let's connect. Don't forget to subscribe to the From Wild West channel and share your thoughts about Grace and Thomas's journey. Your support means everything.